2 million illegal immigrants in California. The federal government won't stop them at the border, yet requires us to pay billions.
Californians who work hard, pay taxes, and obey the laws, I'm suing to force the federal government to control the border. And I'm working to deny state services to illegal immigrants.
Most heavily affected, but in every place in this country are rightly disturbed by the
We
large
are going to make
numbers
DACA
of
happy and the
illegal
DACA people
aliens.
and represent-
Are here to collect on the promises he made to us.
That promise, sweeping pro-immigration reform.
Use imposed burden.
Historically, America has been known to be a land of immigrants. From the Pilgrims who first arrived November 11, 1620, to today, immigrants have come for a variety of reasons, including to escape persecution and violence or to gain more opportunity and freedom. However, the numbers of today are staggering. Mass immigration and the introduction of ICE have produced a true humanitarian crisis at the border. Human rights abuses inside the facilities and problems these immigrants have assimilating within the country have contributed to a decline in overall mental health amongst this vulnerable demographic. The current situation mirrors America's past failures with taking care of the mentally ill, and with no clear answer to solve the problem, a whole new mental health crisis may be upon America. Today, we are here to examine and give a comparative analysis into how this repetition of the past can become a horrifying future for all Americans. The American mental health system of today is a mixture of various forms of community care and the correctional system. The former of the two was heavily influenced by the deinstitutionalization movement in the mid-1950s. The reasons for deinstitutionalization are multifaceted, with factors being attributed to medical, cultural, political, and economic reasons. The movement was initially led by activist groups who promoted more personal freedom and better treatment for patients within these facilities. They led the movement and were then joined by a bipartisan effort to end the asylums. Abuses to patients, especially minorities, along with technological advancements in media, made it easier to acquire information from around the country about these incidents. The stories that former patients and staff had, speaking on the mistreatment and abuses that were occurring, were now widespread, and suits similar to the Wyatt versus Stickney case and other horror stories were out in public more than ever. The pressure resulted in a community care model for the mentally ill. The president during this change was John F. Kennedy, who had a personal investment to help the mentally ill in America after his sister, Rosemary Kennedy, was institutionalized and labeled quote-unquote retarded due to a botched lobotomy. Kennedy had a task force that recommended the implementation of community centers rather than the institutions that were currently in place, and shortly afterwards, he signed the Mental Retardation and Community Health Care Centers Act of 1963. This model was supposed to provide freedom and easy access to services for the mentally ill across the nation. The plan was to build mental health centers to replace institutions. These institutions would be backed by the federal government, and 2,000 were initially planned for construction. And after several laws and policies were passed, the institution was quickly and effectively shut down. The Latimer Petras Short Act of 1967 effectively did just that. This act, quote-unquote, ended inappropriate, indefinite, and involuntary commitment of the mentally disordered persons to institutions. This rapid institutionalization caused a ripple effect, and there are plenty of reasons for the ultimate failure of this model. The centers themselves weren't properly staffed, and only about 754 out of the authorized 2,000 were constructed. This quickly overwhelmed the centers, who were receiving an influx of patients due to the rapid closing of mental state hospitals. In one particular case, Agnew State Hospital released 3,800 people in a single day. Politics also played a role, as the Reagan administration constructed the 1981 Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act, which shifted financial responsibility of the mental health centers on the states and counties. To go along with this, advancements in medical treatment and medication were not the solution that some hoped to be. Other laws were passed that granted the mentally ill with more freedoms, such as the Rennie versus Klein case, which prohibited forced medication. With the centers overwhelmed and poorly funded and managed, the mentally ill often were left on the streets with no help or care. The mentally ill had nowhere else to go, which leads to the second half of the mental health system, the correction system. With the mentally ill left to fend for themselves, many fall into bad habits. These are often crimes, which are oftentimes assault, robbery, destruction of property, trespassing, arson, vandalism, and lastly, drug charges. Many individuals who suffer from an addiction do so because of issues with their mental health or vice versa, and their habits while on the street lead them to be an overrepresented population in prisons and jails. This population, compared to others, is estimated to be about 2 to 4 times overrepresented comparatively to other populations, and this information is according to the DOJ. As a matter of fact, there are 209,128,094 adults living in the United States today, and according to the National Alliance of Mental Illness, 1 out of every 4 suffers from a mental illness, with about 1 out of every 25 U.S. adults suffering from a severe mental illness. The Bureau of Justice Statistics estimated that 705,600 mentally ill adults were incarcerated in state prisons, 78,800 in federal prisons, and 479,900 in local jails, with plenty more being in the community corrections. The cycle of going to jail, being released, being neglected by the mental health system, and then ending back into the correctional system has boosted the recidivism rate significantly. A comprehensive study done by the Department of Justice revealed some shocking discoveries over a 9-year study. The 402,288 state prisoners released in 2005 had an estimated 1,994,000 arrests during the 9-year period, with an average of 5 arrests per released prisoner. 77% of the released drug offenders were arrested for a non-related drug crime within that period, and in total, 83% of the released prisoners were again arrested within the 9-year study. Although the situation has led law enforcement to make adjustments to the treatment of the mentally ill, with reforms such as specialized task forces and more options being provided to aid in the mental health crisis within their facilities, the mentally ill are still being treated in a place where they were not meant to be treated. This has resulted in a deadly cycle for the mentally ill. So now that leaves us with the question: what does that mean for immigrants coming into America, with special regards to their mental health? In short, it means a lot.
Called an invasion, a national emergency, and a humanitarian crisis.
After the events of 9/11, the United States was on high alert and made several efforts to make the U.S. more safe and secure from threats both domestic and foreign. Out of the series of changes came the DHS and ICE, or the Bureau of Immigration and Customs Enforcement. They were started in 2003 and have helped the United States in its efforts to stop crime and drugs coming through the borders of the United States. Some notable achievements are its capture of cartel leader Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, as well as its yearly seizures of drugs coming through the U.S. border. One issue that it hasn't handled so well is the influx of immigrants and refugees that attempt to enter the United States. This, however, is no small task, and according to Pew Research, the U.S. has more immigrants than any country in the world, with more than 40 million people live in the U.S. that weren't born here. According to 2017, estimates on unauthorized immigrants in the U.S. put it around 10.5 million, or just under a quarter of the foreign-born population. The majority of immigrants, as of 2018, come from Mexico at 25% of all immigrants, or 11.2 million people. There were also 337,000 deportations, with more than half being non-criminal. These deportations within the United States have a rippling effect on the children and those left behind in the wake. But these are just the numbers within our borders. What about south of the border? In 2019, 852,000 apprehensions happened at the border, with more than half were classified as family units. This nearly doubles from the previous year according to CBP, but is still reportedly significantly short of the amount apprehended in the early 2000s. The detention centers and other facilities that immigrants are put into are a mix of government and privately owned facilities. According to American Oversight, overcrowding, cold temperatures, and insufficient medical care, sickness and deaths occur at these facilities. Other problems plaguing the facilities, according to an Inspector General report in 2019, cite understaffing, inadequate medical observation, and monitoring of detainees with criminal histories as being a massive issue. Mass infections run rampant in some facilities, such as the 700 migrants infected with mumps, and the children that have reportedly died due to being refused an administration of the flu vaccine. These terrible conditions, compounded with proven research of psychological trauma of traveling to the border, have turned out to be a mental health disaster. According to Cecilia Galvan, 70,000 children were apprehended at the southern border. These children were separated from families and subject to lack of healthcare, education, and development opportunities. What about the conditions of those now legally living within the United States? Research shows that children suffer the most. Fear of deportation by both the child and parent may cause mental illness such as depression. This fear also dissuades many from seeking proper health and care, further worsening their condition. In a case study, Christine Herman follows the struggles of one immigrant family who was under peril due to the legal status. In this case, Jose, an illegal immigrant, has a son who has developed schizophrenia and lives by himself. This condition has led him to enter the criminal justice system, and Jose fears that his trouble with the law puts him at a risk of deportation. Should he try and help him? The deplorable conditions at the border, policies and laws, mental health of immigrants living in the United States carries scary comparisons and conditions of treatment to those in mental health institutions of the past. Outcries of activist groups such as the International Immigrant Justice Center ring a similar tone for those pushing the government to try more community-based efforts. The crisis of the border is not getting better, and those living under fear now have limited options when it comes to work, education, healthcare, and unless the United States can come together and help those in need, we will have failed yet another group of individuals, leaving them to fend for themselves and subject to the criminal justice system. The repetition of history may just be inevitable. However, if history has taught us one thing, it has taught us what works and what doesn't. Change is needed, and hopefully this is the start of it.